Tonight, the sea was calm in a way that felt almost deliberate. Not silent, never silent, but breathing slowly, like something large and ancient resting beneath the blanket of gray clouds. The ship moved forward without hurry, its hull slicing the water with a steady, patient rhythm. Each wave whispered against the wood as though reassuring it, "You may pass." Winter had already arrived, but gently. The cold had not yet sharpened its teeth. On deck, lanterns swayed softly, their amber light reflecting off thin sheets of frost that had formed during the night. Sailors walked carefully, boots crunching faintly, their breath blooming into the air like pale smoke. No one spoke loudly. There was no need. The sea demanded quiet respect, and tonight it offered safe passage in return. This voyage had begun like many others, routine, almost forgettable. The ship carried supplies, letters, and the weight of ordinary hopes. Warm bread wrapped in cloth below deck, barrels of salted meat, wool blankets folded tightly, meant for colder days ahead. Nothing suggested that this journey would become anything more than a line in a logbook. Below deck, the passengers settled into the rhythm of travel. A woman rocked her child in a narrow bunk, humming a tune so soft it blended with the creaking timbers. An older man traced the grain of the wooden table with his fingers, counting knots as if they were days yet to come. Somewhere, a kettle warmed slowly, promising tea before sleep. The captain stood alone near the helm. He had seen winters before, long ones, cruel ones, but tonight did not trouble him. The stars were hidden, but the wind was steady. The compass needle rested calmly. The ice charts showed danger far ahead. Not here. Not yet. He pulled his coat tighter and allowed himself a rare comfort: confidence. The ship pressed on, unaware that the sea was only being polite. Far in the distance, where the horizon dissolved into cloud and shadow, the temperature was already falling. Ice was forming quietly, patiently, layer by layer, breath by breath, not rushing, never rushing. Winter never rushed. And so the ship sailed forward, carrying its quiet lives into the night, while the cold waited, unnoticed, unannounced, ready to change everything. The voyage continued. Morning arrived without color. The sky lightened slowly, not into blue, but into a pale silver that felt thin and tired. Light spread across the sea like a hesitant thought, revealing water that no longer moved as freely as it had the night before. The waves were smaller now, slower, as if something unseen beneath the surface was beginning to resist them. On deck, the cold felt different, not sharper, just heavier. It pressed against coats and gloves, seeping inward with quiet persistence. Frost clung more firmly to the railings, no longer melting when touched. A sailor paused, brushing at it with his sleeve, then frowned as it remained stubborn and dry. The ship still moved, but with effort. Its familiar rhythm had changed. Each push forward seemed to take longer, the hull groaning softly, as though waking from a deep sleep and realizing it did not want to rise. The sound traveled through the timbers and into the bunks below, where passengers stirred and listened, without fully understanding why they felt uneasy. Breakfast was quieter than usual. Mugs were wrapped in both hands. Bread was broken slowly. Steam rose and vanished too quickly in the cold air. No one complained, but eyes lingered longer on the walls, the ceiling, the small portholes clouded with ice. The world outside felt farther away than it should have. Above, the captain studied the sea. Thin lines stretched across the water, barely visible, like scratches on glass. New ice, young ice, the kind that pretended to be harmless. He had seen it before, had sailed through it before, but never without caution. He ordered the speed reduced, the course adjusted slightly south. The ship obeyed. It always did. But even as it turned, a soft, unfamiliar sound followed, a faint crackle like distant embers shifting in a fire. Ice brushing against wood, not striking, just touching, learning the shape of the vessel. By midday the wind fell away, not abruptly, but gradually, until the sails hung heavy and tired. The sea flattened further, losing its breath. Silence spread, not complete silence, but a muffled stillness that swallowed familiar sounds and left only the slow creak of the ship itself. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else told them to stop. No one said the word ice out loud, because naming something makes it real. As evening approached, the ship pushed on through water that now resisted every movement. Progress was measured in careful moments instead of miles. The captain marked the log with steady handwriting, though his jaw was tight. Winter had not attacked. It had simply placed a hand on the ship and asked it to slow down. And the ship, for the first time, began to wonder if it could ever move freely again. By nightfall, the sea had forgotten how to flow. What surrounded the ship was no longer water in motion, but something between liquid and land, a wide, dim field of broken reflections. The moon rose faintly behind clouds, its light fractured into countless pale shards across the surface. Each piece of ice drifted slowly, turning, touching, separating again, as though testing how close it could come. The ship moved only when it was allowed. Each forward push ended in a soft, resistant sigh. The hull pressed against the ice, not with violence, but with exhaustion. Wood and frost spoke to one another in small, uneasy sounds, creaks, clicks, and low groans that echoed through the sleeping quarters below. Most of the passengers could not sleep. They lay wrapped in blankets, listening. The ship no longer rocked them gently. It held them still, as if asking them to pay attention. Somewhere in the darkness, ice scraped along the side. Not enough to damage, just enough to be felt. A child whispered a question. No one answered. On deck, the crew worked quietly, poles in hand, pushing away the thickening sheets as best they could. Each shove opened a narrow path that closed again almost immediately. The sea was relearning itself, freezing memory by memory. The captain remained near the bow. He knelt and placed a gloved hand against the rail, feeling the vibration of the ship. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The ice was no longer drifting past. It was matching their pace, studying them, becoming familiar with the curve of the hull, the depth of the keel. Ice always learned. Orders were given in low voices. No shouting, no urgency, yet. Engines strained gently, then more firmly, then were eased again. Pushing too hard would be worse than stopping. Everyone aboard knew this, even if they did not say it. Midnight passed unnoticed. Time lost its usual shape. Watches blurred together. The stars, when they briefly appeared, looked distant and uninterested, cold points observing without sympathy. Then, sometime before dawn, the ship stopped. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It simply failed to continue. The engine turned, the sails waited, but the ship did not respond. Ice pressed in on all sides, fitting itself neatly along the hull like a mold, finally complete. The sea had finished learning the ship's shape. And now it held on. Morning returned, but the ship did not move to greet it. Light revealed what darkness had hidden, a vast pale plain stretching in every direction. The sea was gone, replaced by a frozen surface that shimmered faintly under the weak sun. The ship sat within it, perfectly still, as if it had always belonged there. No wake followed behind, no water lapped at the bow, only ice layered, cracked, and locked together. The crew gathered on deck in silence. Boots met resistance where they once found wood, alone. Frost had climbed higher along the hull overnight, gripping it with quiet determination. A sailor struck the ice with a pole, and the sound rang dull and final. Below deck, the passengers felt it before they were told. The ship's familiar hum was missing. No vibration, no forward lean. The world had stopped shifting beneath them. Cups sat undisturbed on tables. Hanging lamps no longer swayed. The captain called everyone together. He spoke carefully, choosing each word as if it carried weight, which it did. The ship was not damaged. There was no immediate danger. The ice was thick, yes, but ice could change. Winds could shift. The thaw would come eventually. Eventually was a dangerous word. Rations were counted. Coal was measured. Blankets were redistributed. The routine of travel was replaced by the routine of waiting. Everyone was given something small to do, because stillness invited fear. Outside, the wind returned briefly, brushing the frozen surface and leaving it unchanged. The ice did not listen anymore. As the day wore on, the temperature fell further. Breath turned sharper. Fingers stiffened faster. The ship's shadow stretched long across the frozen sea, dark and thin, like a reminder of movement that once existed. That night, the sounds changed. No waves, no water. Only the slow, deep pressure of ice settling around the hull, tightening its hold. The ship groaned softly, not in pain, but in protest. A sound like a tired animal refusing to lie down. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams were filled with motion, walking, running, sailing, only to end in sudden stillness. Each waking brought the same realization: they had not moved at all. The voyage had ended without arrival. The ship had become something else now, not a traveler, a prisoner. The days that followed did not announce themselves. They arrived quietly, one after another, each nearly identical to the last. Morning light would slide across the ice, pale and distant, then fade again into long, colorless evenings. Time loosened its grip, stretching thin and uneven. Waiting became a skill. The crew established rhythms not to measure progress, but to protect the mind. Watches were kept, though there was nothing to watch for. Meals were served at the same hours each day, though hunger came more from cold than effort. Every routine was an anchor, holding thoughts in place. Outside, the ice shifted without moving. Deep cracks echoed across the frozen plain, loud enough to startle, then fell silent again. The sound traveled far, reminding everyone that the sea beneath was still alive, even if it could not yet breathe. Inside the ship, warmth was rationed. The coal stove burned gently, never fiercely. Hands hovered over it, reluctant to leave. Damp gloves were dried slowly. Socks were turned and retied. Nothing was wasted. Even crumbs were noticed now. Conversations grew softer. People spoke of ordinary things, gardens left behind, streets they knew by heart, the taste of food in warmer seasons. No one spoke of rescue. No one spoke of how long ice could hold a ship. Children learned quickly. They learned to stay close, to play quietly, to listen when the adults stopped speaking. A deck of worn cards appeared, edges softened by many hands. Stories were told slowly, repeated often, their familiarity becoming comfort. At night, the ship settled deeper into the ice, not sinking, nesting. Pressure pressed inward, a constant gentle force. The hull answered with slow creaks, each one reminding them that the ship was still strong, still holding. The sound became part of sleep, like breathing. One evening, snow began to fall, not heavily, just enough to blur the horizon. It coated the deck, softened sharp edges, made the frozen world feel even quieter. Footprints appeared and vanished again, erased within minutes. Waiting no longer felt temporary. It felt like a place where nothing happened quickly, where survival depended not on strength, but on patience, where the loudest victories were small: a warm cup, a repaired glove, a shared smile. The ship was no longer moving through winter. Winter was moving through them. The snow did not stop. It fell steadily, quietly, hour after hour, until the edges of the ship softened and blurred. Railings disappeared beneath smooth curves. Lines and ropes became pale shapes half buried in silence. The world simplified itself into white and gray. Distances were harder to judge now. The horizon dissolved, leaving no clear beginning or end. Sky and ice met and agreed to look the same. Stepping away from the ship felt different, dangerous, even when the ground was solid. A few paces out, and the vessel already seemed farther away than it should. Markers were placed, poles, ropes, dark scraps of cloth tied carefully to guide anyone who ventured onto the ice. No one walked far, no one walked alone. Even small tasks required planning now. Inside, the light grew dimmer. Lanterns burned longer. Shadows stretched across walls and bunks. The smell of oil, wool, and wood became familiar, almost comforting. Sound was absorbed by the snow outside, making the ship feel wrapped, insulated, cut off. Letters were read again. Some were folded and unfolded until the creases softened. Names were whispered, not spoken. Memories became warmer than the stove and just as carefully guarded. The captain updated the log each day. The entries grew shorter, not because less was happening, but because the same thing happened again and again. Ship fast in ice, weather cold, all well. The words tried to sound steady. At night the cold crept deeper. It slipped into corners, into bones, into dreams. Sleep came lightly and left often. People woke unsure whether hours or minutes had passed. Time had begun to drift just like the ice once did. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing any sign that the world beyond still existed. The ship was now an island, a small, dark shape surrounded by endless white. And somewhere beneath the ice, the sea waited. The cold no longer surprised anyone. It had settled into life aboard the ship like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. People moved carefully now, conserving energy, learning which motions warmed the body and which only wasted strength. Even breathing felt measured. Days were counted by habit, not certainty. Someone scratched marks into a small piece of wood, one for each sunrise. The lines were close together, careful not to waste space. No one asked how many there would be. Work continued, though it was slower. Ice was chipped from around the hull where possible, not to free the ship, but to ease the pressure. Each strike echoed across the frozen plain. Sharp and lonely, the ice resisted without anger. It had time. Inside, small repairs filled the hours. Loose boards were tightened. Torn seams were stitched. Tools were cleaned even when they were not needed. Keeping hands busy kept thoughts from wandering too far. Hunger changed. It was no longer sharp or demanding. It became a dull presence, constant but manageable. Meals were smaller now, carefully balanced. No one complained. No one asked for more. At night, stories grew longer. They were told slowly, with pauses, allowing listeners to drift in and out of sleep. Familiar tales became softer each time they were repeated, like stones worn smooth by water. Even the endings changed, bending gently toward comfort instead of truth. Sometimes the ice spoke loudly. A sudden crack would tear through the stillness, followed by a deep rumble that traveled underfoot. Hearts would race, then slow again when the ship held firm. Each time, relief felt quieter, more tired. The children noticed the adults' faces. They noticed how smiles took effort now, how eyes lingered longer on the stove, the doorway, the ice beyond the hull. They learned not to ask certain questions. The world had become very small. A few rooms, a few people, a few shared breaths of warmth. And within that smallness, life continued. Not boldly, not bravely, but steadily. That was enough. Hope did not arrive loudly. It did not announce itself with plans or promises. Instead, it slipped into the days quietly, almost unnoticed, taking the shape of small expectations. The ice might shift today, the wind might change, the light might linger a little longer. These thoughts were not spoken often. Speaking them felt risky, as if saying them aloud might chase them away. So hope stayed inside gestures instead. An extra scoop carefully saved, a blanket tucked more tightly around a sleeping child, a nod shared across the room. The light changed slowly. It began to linger just a moment longer at the edge of evening. The difference was small, almost imaginary, but eyes noticed it anyway. Shadows softened. Darkness arrived less suddenly. The crew listened to the ice. They learned its moods, which sounds meant settling, which meant movement, which meant nothing at all. The ship answered back with its own language of creaks and sighs, and together they formed a conversation that never quite became friendly. One morning, someone found water, a narrow line of dark surface, barely wider than a hand, where the ice had pulled apart and then frozen again. It was nothing useful, nothing that could free them. But it was change. Change mattered. That night, dreams felt different. People dreamed of doors opening slowly, of roads stretching forward, of warmth that did not fade when waking. These dreams were gentler than before, less urgent. Still, the waiting continued. Coal grew lighter. Food bins were checked more often. The careful balance between use and saving became second nature. Hope learned to stay small. It learned to whisper. And in that whisper, it endured. The night arrived earlier than expected. Clouds gathered low and heavy, dimming the weak light of day until it faded into something closer to dusk. Snow began again, thicker this time, filling the air with slow-moving shapes that seemed to fall without ever reaching the ground. Inside the ship, lanterns were lit before anyone spoke the word night. Their glow felt fragile against the vastness pressing in from outside. Shadows gathered in corners, deep and unmoving. The walls seemed closer, as if the ship itself were drawing inward. The cold deepened. It crept into places that had stayed warm until now, beneath blankets, into boots, into the spaces between breaths. Sleep came reluctantly, broken by waking chills and the sound of ice shifting far below. Then the pressure changed. Not suddenly, but unmistakably. A long, low groan passed through the hull, followed by another. The sound was deeper than any before, vibrating through wood and bone alike. Everyone woke. No one panicked. Panic required energy, and energy was precious. Instead, people sat up, listening, counting seconds between sounds. The ice pressed. The ship answered. Again and again. A beam cracked. It was small, nothing dangerous, but the sound carried. Tools were gathered. The crack was braced, reinforced, wrapped. Hands worked steadily, guided by lantern light and quiet voices. Hours passed like this. The night seemed endless, stretching outward, without shape. Outside, the wind rose briefly, howling across the frozen plain, then fell away again, leaving only the weight of ice and the soft breath of those waiting. When morning finally arrived, it felt earned. The ship still stood. So did the people inside it. The longest night had passed, leaving behind exhaustion and a fragile, unspoken pride they had endured. Morning came quietly, as if afraid to disturb what had held together through the night. The light was thin and colorless, but it was light nonetheless. It slipped through frosted glass and narrow gaps, settling gently on tired faces and folded blankets. For a long moment, no one moved. Breathing was checked first, slow, steady, present. Then someone nodded. Another sat up. Life resumed. The damage from the night was small, almost disappointing in its ordinary nature. A split board, a loosened brace. Ice pressed hard but had not won. Repairs were made carefully, hands stiff but practiced, each task restoring a little confidence along with warmth. Hot water was shared, not much, just enough to thaw fingers and ease throats, but it felt generous. Steam rose like a blessing, disappearing almost immediately into the cold air. People lingered over their cups, holding them longer than necessary. Outside, the ice looked unchanged, white, vast, patient. But inside, something had shifted. The night had tested them. And they had answered, not with strength or speed, but with steadiness. That mattered more than anyone said aloud. The children noticed it first. They played a little louder, laughed a little longer, not enough to waste energy, just enough to remind everyone that the world still held softness. The captain stood at the doorway and looked out across the frozen sea. He did not expect movement. He did not expect rescue. But he allowed himself to notice that the light stayed longer today. Even winter could not take that away. The days began to stretch, not by much, only minutes at first. But those minutes were felt deeply. Light lingered on the ice just a little longer before retreating, softening the sharp edges of the frozen world. It made the ship look less trapped, less alone. People adjusted their routines without realizing it. Morning tasks took place with less haste. Evening preparations waited a little longer. Lanterns were lit later now, their flames flickering with quiet patience instead of urgency. The ice changed its voice. Where once it had groaned and cracked without warning, now it spoke more gently, soft pops, distant murmurs beneath the surface. These sounds were not freedom, but they were movement, and movement, however small, was a promise. Outside walks became slightly longer. Ropes were checked and tightened. Snow was cleared from pathways worn smooth by many careful steps. Faces turned toward the weak sun, eyes closing briefly to remember warmth. Inside, spirits lifted quietly, not joy. Joy felt too large. But something steadier, acceptance, mixed with resolve. People began to plan small things again. How to stretch meals, how to mend clothing, how to keep minds busy through the long wait ahead. One evening, a song was hummed, not loudly, just enough to fill the space between breaths. Others joined, not in harmony, but in presence. The sound warmed the room in a way the stove never could. The frozen prison still held them. But the walls felt thinner now. It happened so quietly that at first no one trusted it. A faint movement beneath the ship, a soft lift, then a settling. Not pressure this time, but release. The ice no longer pressed inward with the same certainty. It shifted, testing itself, listening. The crew noticed first. They paused mid-task, heads tilted, hands resting against the hull. The sound was different now, less rigid, more uncertain. Ice does not decide quickly, but when it begins to doubt, it never forgets how to move. A thin crack appeared near the bow. Not sharp, not threatening, just a narrow line of dark water breathing slowly between white edges. It closed again almost immediately, but it had existed. That was enough. Excitement stayed contained. Voices remained low, movements careful. No one rushed outside to celebrate what could vanish as easily as it had come. Hope, by now, knew how to behave. The captain adjusted the log, ice shifting. Slight movement observed. The words were neat, restrained, but his hand lingered longer than usual on the page. The cold remained. It would not leave quickly. But it had changed its mind about holding on forever. That night, sleep came easier. Dreams were still quiet, still slow, but they drifted forward now instead of circling the same frozen moment. People dreamed of doors opening gently, of roads clearing themselves without force. Outside, the ice breathed again, and the ship listened. No one felt it at first. Movement, when it finally came, was too small to announce itself. It was a suggestion rather than an action, a faint, unfamiliar shift beneath the soles of boots. A cup trembled slightly on a table, then stilled. Someone looked up. Someone else froze mid-step. The ship had moved. Not forward, not free. But it had answered the ice with something other than silence. The hull settled into a new position, just enough to be noticed by those who had memorized its stillness. Outside, the ice looked the same, but sound told a different story. The deep, rigid groans were gone. In their place came softer noises, sliding, rubbing, the quiet conversation of surfaces no longer locked together. Carefully, cautiously, the crew tested the engine, just a breath of power, nothing more. The ship responded with a gentle shudder, like a limb waking after long sleep. It did not break free, but it did not resist either. That was enough. No cheers followed, no shouts. Everyone had learned restraint. Freedom demanded patience, not excitement. The day passed with quiet attention. Eyes watched the cracks widen, close, widen again. Water appeared more often now, thin and dark, reflecting light like glass. The sea beneath was remembering how to move. At night the ship rested differently, not pinned, not held tight, just waiting. The next morning felt unfamiliar, not warmer, winter was still very much present, but lighter somehow. The air carried a softness that had been missing for weeks, as if the cold itself had loosened its grip just enough to allow breathing without effort. The ship rested at a slight angle now. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, unless you knew the floor by heart. But everyone did. They had memorized every slant and creak, every sound of stillness. This new tilt was different. It meant the ice was no longer holding evenly. Careful steps were taken outside. Boots tested the surface. Poles pressed down, listening for resistance. The ice responded with a quiet complaint, not the solid certainty it once had. Cracks widened under pressure, then closed again, unsure of themselves. The crew worked patiently. They cleared ice where they could, not aggressively, not desperately, but with respect for the slow process unfolding. Each small effort felt like cooperation rather than struggle. Inside, the passengers felt it too. Movements came easier. Shoulders relaxed without realizing it. Conversations lasted a little longer. Someone laughed and did not stop themselves this time. Food tasted better. Not because there was more of it, but because it no longer felt like something that had to last forever. The future, once a blank wall of white, now showed faint lines, possibilities, directions. That evening, the ship shifted again, just a fraction, just enough to make the lanterns sway ever so slightly. The motion was so gentle, it felt like being rocked by memory. The frozen prison had not opened its doors, but it had unlocked them. The sound came first, a soft liquid murmur beneath the hull, so faint it could have been imagined. But it returned again and again, steady and unmistakable. Water moving slowly, reclaiming space it had surrendered to ice. By midday, narrow channels had formed. Dark veins cut through the white surface, winding gently around the ship. They reflected the pale sky like broken mirrors, fragile and beautiful. The sea was awake again, though still cautious. No one rushed. Experience had taught them that haste belonged to those who had not waited. The crew tested each opening carefully, pushing aside loose ice, listening to how the water answered. It flowed, then paused, then flowed again. The ship responded with a deeper movement, not just settling now, but leaning forward slightly, as if remembering its purpose. The hull creaked, not in protest, but in relief. Inside, belongings were gathered quietly, blankets folded, tools returned to their places. Nothing was packed fully. It was too soon for that. But preparing felt natural now, no longer foolish. The children were kept close. Excitement shimmered in their eyes, but it was tempered by the seriousness they had learned during the long wait. Freedom, they sensed, was not loud. By evening, water surrounded the ship on 3 sides. The ice still held fast at the stern, reluctant to let go. Winter never released anything without hesitation. That night, sleep was deep and heavy. For the first time in weeks, dreams carried the feeling of forward motion. Morning arrived with movement, not much, just enough to be felt in the knees, in the way the floor responded to weight. The ship rose and fell almost imperceptibly, testing the water beneath like a body stretching after long confinement. The sea was cautious too. It did not rush in. It slid gently along the hull, cold and dark, carrying fragments of ice away one by one. Each piece drifted off slowly, as if reluctant to leave the place where it had held so much power. The crew worked in silence. No orders were shouted. Everyone already knew what to do. Lines were checked. Ice was guided away from the propeller. The engine was warmed carefully, patiently, like an old friend being asked to wake. When it finally turned, it did so quietly. A low, steady hum filled the ship, not forceful, not triumphant, but familiar. The sound traveled through wood and metal, reaching every corner where stillness had lived for too long. The ship answered. It did not surge forward. It did not break free all at once. Instead, it eased itself into motion inch by inch, like something remembering how to walk. Outside, the ice released its hold completely. What remained drifted away, spinning slowly, losing shape, losing purpose. The frozen prison did not shatter. It dissolved. Inside, people stood without speaking. Some held onto railings. Some closed their eyes. A few rested their hands against the walls, feeling the vibration, grounding themselves in the present moment. They were moving again, and movement, after so much waiting, felt almost unreal. The first true distance was measured quietly, not in miles, but in sound. The ship's wake returned, a soft, familiar whisper trailing behind the hull. Water folded over itself again, remembering old habits. The ice that remained drifted away slowly, no longer interested in holding on. No one cheered. Instead, people watched in silence as the frozen world loosened and spread apart. The vast white plain that had once felt endless now broken to pieces, each one smaller, less certain, less powerful. The ship moved carefully at first. The captain kept the speed low, respecting what winter had been and what it still could be. The sea, though awake, was fragile. Everyone understood that survival did not end the moment freedom began. Warmth felt different now. The stove still burned. Blankets were still wrapped tightly. But there was a sense of direction again. Forward. Always forward. The future was no longer a wall. It was a path. Inside, conversations shifted. They spoke of ports, of land, of letters that would finally be delivered. The words were gentle, unhurried, as if spoken too loudly might undo what had been gained. As evening came, the sky cleared slightly. A faint band of color appeared near the horizon, soft blues, pale golds, barely there. It reflected off the water and the broken ice alike, touching everything with the same quiet grace. The frozen prison was behind them now, not forgotten, never forgotten, but no longer holding them still. As the ship pressed onward, the silence changed again. It was no longer the heavy quiet of waiting, nor the tense stillness of ice pressing in. This silence was spacious, open, filled with distance and memory. The frozen world receded slowly behind them, not disappearing, but thinning, like a dream that fades without fully letting go. People felt it in unexpected ways. A sailor paused longer than necessary at the rail, watching broken ice turn and drift. A woman folded a blanket she no longer needed and held it to her chest for a moment before putting it away. The children asked fewer questions now, sensing that something important had ended. Survival leaves marks. Not visible ones, but deep and quiet. It changes how time is felt, how comfort is understood. Warmth became precious in a new way, not just something to seek, but something to remember. That night sleep came easily, but it was not empty. Dreams returned to the ice, not with fear, but with clarity. People dreamed of stillness, of waiting, of how close silence can come without breaking a person. The ship moved steadily forward, but part of them remained behind, resting in that frozen place where they learned how strong, quiet patience could be. The days that followed felt gentler, but never careless. The sea rolled softly beneath the ship now, steady and predictable, yet no one took it for granted. Each movement was noticed, each sound was acknowledged. They had learned what it meant for motion to disappear, and that knowledge stayed with them. Winter lingered in small ways. Hands still reached for gloves, even when the air allowed bare skin. People checked stores more often than necessary. Lanterns were cleaned and filled early, just in case. These habits were not fear. They were memory. Conversations turned reflective. They spoke about what they had learned without naming it directly, about how little was truly needed, about how patience could be stronger than force, about how people, when stripped of urgency, revealed their quiet resilience. The captain watched the horizon each morning, not searching for danger, but respecting it. He had seen what happened when nature was underestimated, and also what happened when it was met with humility. One evening, as the ship moved through calm water under a pale sky, someone said softly, "We'll remember this." No one disagreed. The frozen prison was far behind them now, but winter had shaped them, and that shape would remain. The ship reached open water slowly, respectfully. There was no clear moment when winter ended. No line crossed, no sound to mark it. The cold simply loosened its presence, retreating into memory while the sea reclaimed its steady rhythm. The days grew brighter, not warmer all at once, but kinder. The horizon widened. The sky remembered color. Sunlight rested longer on the deck, and when it did, people paused to feel it, letting it settle into their bones. Life returned in small, ordinary ways. Boots dried fully. Hands relaxed. Laughter came without hesitation. The ship smelled again of wood and salt instead of frost. The voyage resumed, not as it had begun, but as something changed. No one rushed to forget. The frozen prison had taken nothing without giving something in return. It had taught them how to wait, how to endure quietly, how to share warmth without waste, and hope without noise. When land finally appeared, dark and solid against the pale distance, it was greeted with calm gratitude rather than celebration. Survival had taught them that arrival was not the victory. Endurance was. The ship sailed on, carrying its people forward and carrying winter gently within them where it would never again feel frightening, only remembered.